what makes this industry, what makes long-term care so unique is, just to put it into perspective, if you run a factory and you need to produce these water bottles, right?
Yeah.
So this is a client that came to you and said, "Hey, Tyler, I want your factory to start making these water bottles. I want it to look like this. I want it to hold this much water. I want it to be made out of this material." And what you have to do is you have to retool your factory to just pump these water bottles out. Boom, 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 boom. And so you create what's called a standard of practice. In long-term care,
You get your standard operating procedure done for this issue in general, and like you're done. You dial in, then you're competing in the marketplace, but your product, you get it done.
You know exactly what your margins are.
Yeah.
You know exactly how many people you need to hire to be able to produce the quantity that's expected of you.
Yep.
I mean, it's simple. It's plug and play.
Yeah.
In long-term care, our product are people. And so we're not only having to focus on the demands of our labor, our caregivers,
Yeah.
we're also having to focus on the changing dynamics and expectations and regulatory changes of the individuals. And so it's very difficult for you to create a standard of practice, and it's very difficult for you to be able to create some continuity, and it's exacerbated by the fact that the wages aren't commensurate for people to consider this to be a long-term career. Instead, it's more like, I'll hang my hat here for a month or two, and then I'll find something else.
And meanwhile, again, they're providing some of the most critical and vital services for this family, and they're expected to be providing exceptional level of cares. And then as your management team, because of the shifting needs of the product being the people, and also the regulatory framework, the training has to change constantly, as well as the turnover of staffing.
Right. You have somebody that is a caregiver, a counselor, a financial advisor, they're playing all these roles.
Yeah.
And they're not even medically trained, formally medically trained, to be able to handle disabilities like, schizophrenia, for example, or really any psychiatric condition under the sun. And as the growing diagnoses for people with Alzheimer's and dementia continues to grow, and so people that are being more consistently diagnosed with dementia, like, that's a skill that really, most people that are under the age of 60 probably have never really been trained on. And if they have been trained on it, they've been trained on it because it's been necessary for them to facilitate care for a loved one. So, just think of that. You have this massive upswing, and this applies to when you talk about not just the elderly population that is growing at a significant rate. When we're talking about the ratio of people over the age of 65 versus the amount of people that are under the age of 18, in Tennessee, within 7 years, we're going to have more people over the age of 65 than under the age of 18.
And this is something that I try to educate our clients on, whether it's Medicaid planning, some type of long-term care planning, we're looking at their options for care, and the likelihood and viability of Medicaid to come into their lives, is that, like, listen, we're on this kind of this ramp up, and we're having a shrink. We know fertility rates are down, we know the workforce is shrinking, but yet our elderly population are going to live longer, and the number are growing. So again, if you can just expand upon that, I just don't think that the public really understands just how big of a threat, but also an opportunity that this provides to us that we're going to have to solve. And you're on the front lines.
Yeah. So the best way to frame it is, number one, there is no payer for long-term care except for Medicaid. So people always think that Medicare is going to pay for long-term care. It does not. It pays for 100 days in a nursing home to get rehab, up to 100 days.
Up to 100, yeah.
Right. And then you can get some outpatient home health services, but it's very preventative in nature. So it's not meant to be long-term maintenance. So for you to qualify for Medicaid, you have to have assets under a certain amount. It's essentially meant for people that are in poverty that can't afford to pay for these services out of pocket, which, if you look at the statistics, most people have not saved for retirement. And 21% of Americans have saved roughly about $200,000 on average in a 401k, which is only about a year's worth of long-term care. You have an 80% chance of needing long-term care from the ages of 75 till end of life. You have to qualify by not having any assets under, and also earning under a certain amount to qualify for long-term care coverage through Medicaid. Okay. You only have 21% of people in the United States that are aging that are actually saving for retirement. And when they do save, they're not going to save enough to cover more than 1 year.
Which is basic math here.
Correct.
Or they're just not.
Right. 7% of people actually own a long-term care insurance policy, which is, this much.
Yep.
And it's an inevitability that 75% of people 80% of people over the age of 75 are going to need long-term care at some point, and on average, it's going to be about 1.2 years. So the point that I'm making is, if you don't plan for this inevitability, you are going to be in crisis. And by crisis, I mean it will not just be painful for you as a person that has a loved one needing these services, and you can't meet your other responsibilities like taking care of your own children, your job, your full-time job, maybe your second full-time job. And lastly, if there's any generational wealth that you're trying to pass on to your kids, like, that's wiped out.
It's getting zapped. And I just want to reiterate, it's so important that we've got a third party non-lawyer who's in the long-term care industry stating this. We really try to educate our clients to make informed decisions, and maybe I should be more aggressive here. But what we just heard is 80% of folks from 75 to end of life will need Medicaid. Out of those people, a tiny portion are going to have the private pay funds or a long-term care policy. So roughly 80% or more of those people will need Medicaid. What we're hearing is the vast majority of the American population will need subsidized care.
Yes.
And we could go into a long ethical discussion. We have varied political opinions, and these things, all of this kind of comes in to all of this. But here's the thing I think most people agree upon. We know that 80% or more of people in a long-term care facility are being subsidized by Medicaid.
Right.
Many of those people have no assets, including real estate. Right. And that we know that the other portion, middle class, I don't really like using that term, but for folks that still need Medicaid but maybe had their home paid off and other things, now they're clawed back again. All right. So when we talk about generational wealth, we have people that are impacted generationally because they needed care. And our society right now feels like we're still going to tax those people again. And, I just don't think that's really fair. That's the framework we've been operating in for many, many years. That's the reality.
It's like the triple dipper at Chili's.
That's a great analogy, Kosta, to say that. Yes, it is. It really is,
So you dip in when you're working and you pay in taxes, and then you dip in at your 401k when you turn 65 and you pull out, and then you dip in, or actually when you're paying for Medicare too.
Yeah.
And then at the very end, the triple dip is when you finally need long-term care, and they're like, okay, we're going to take the rest of it now. And I mean, I don't mean to make it sound so bleak. It's just that, like, people, they're not aware. Like, that's why I have to go to the absolute extreme,
to bring the awareness.
Exactly. Because if people aren't aware that this is most likely going to happen, then, I mean, it's just going to perpetuate this cycle of people having to work, 80 to 100 hours a week to make ends meet, because they have no generational wealth to help them sort of bridge some of those gaps. Just imagine, like, for example, if your parents worked their entire life to pay off their house.
What are they trying to pass on? Their house.
And their land. Right. And so obviously TennCare, in Tennessee, the Medicaid system is called TennCare. They are they're very cognizant. And here's the problem. Why they're cognizant of estate planning in terms of asset protection.
Yeah.
I don't know if I'm using the right
terms. That is the term. Yeah.
Okay. Is because Medicaid is so expensive that they know if they kind of open the door, they're going to have a lot of financial challenges. And the state's fiscally conservative, just like a lot of other states are.
Yep.
And they have to be very vigilant.
Yes.
But I'll tell you this: at some point, and it hasn't become an issue yet, but at some point, people are either going to continue working with law firms, estate planning firms like yourself, and they're going to be able to create a compilation of avenues to be able to get on Medicaid to receive long-term care because it's inevitable. Mm-hmm. Or there will be some regulatory changes, and the federal government will have to step in and subsidize the care and take some of the pressure off the states. Because what people also don't know is Medicaid is a state-by-state program. So every single Medicaid program is different because it's not a federal program, it's a state program.
Yeah, and kind of what you're referencing is, while Medicaid and Medicare are federal programs, they release these federal dollars to all the states, and largely that's kind of the Wild West in a lot of different states. For instance, we see folks bringing an asset protection trust from Ohio, from California into Tennessee, and hey, we funded this 5 years ago. Are we still good with this 5-year look back? No, you're the grantor of this trust here. You can't do this in Tennessee. Well, what are our options? Well, there are a few, but there's not a lot of great ones. I mean, state law versus federal law, when we talk about Medicaid planning from a legal perspective, gets complex because of that.
How complex is it though? Like when you're talking to clients, like do you ever just do you know within the first 5 or 10 minutes if something is going to work or not? And more importantly, do you know if something is going to be extremely complicated or streamlined?
Okay, so largely we do. I can pretty much quickly take a look at a snapshot of assets and income, whether they're married, that matters. If we've got married couples and we're in crisis planning, which again, that means we did not plan ahead.
How often does that happen?
A lot, and we probably get, 2 to 4, cases a month where, hey, and the issue looks like this. We've got a married couple with this $200,000 IRA. Mom, the real estate's still in their name, John and Sarah, right? Mm-hmm. John's going into a long-term care facility, and how are we going to pay for this? Well, they didn't proactively plan. We've just talked about why we're bringing awareness. They don't have a long-term care insurance policy. They did not set up an asset protection trust 5 years ago. So what are we going to do? And so, so number one, it is complex, not because the planning's complex, but because we're dealing with a regulatory framework in the Medicaid agency. We will submit the application. We're essentially going to represent this client with the eligibility specialist. We will handle the appeal and deal with the TennCare appellate attorneys, but we're dealing with lots of non-lawyers at the base level. They have lots of turnover. We have to educate them on the gift, on the Medicaid compliant annuity, on the basic real estate transfer to the wife. And they're not looking to approve. They should not be called eligibility specialists. A lot of times they should just be denial specialists. I don't, there's a lot of really great workers out there. There really are, but the number of appeals we're having to do now. I was at a CLE at Belmont last year, an elder law CLE, and they had a TennCare representative there. I mean, it was like, this is our marching orders. This is the amount of people we've got to get off the rolls.
Oh yeah. How many, isn't it up to is it 400,000 or 800,000?
That sounds right. I don't remember the exact number. It was a lot.
In 1 year.
In a year. Yeah, and we're seeing that. I mean, I'm having to appeal more times than not. Sometimes there's something to discuss, but a lot of times it's like, why was, and now we're just in the appellate phase, and because they're just trying to put more pressure on the case, it feels that way.
So do you ever lose the appeal and they don't get coverage?
It is a potential outcome that we have to advise clients on. It's not a common thing, certainly not with our firm. We do everything we can to plan conservatively.
Right.
Everything we do, I just want to say, it's, again, that's what lawyers do. You just mentioned that, essentially at some point, they're just going to have to change the framework because that's what good lawyers do. Right. We work within the tax code. We work within the Medicaid guidelines, the TennCare manual, federal and state law, and our job is to represent the individual and to take that pressure and pain off of a person. Those are our clients. We don't represent the state. We don't represent the agency. And so that's our job. But your question was, do these things get denied? They can. The problem is too, we're not in circuit court. We're not, in a state court of record. We're in front of an administrative law judge. We're in an administrative agency. I don't want to go on a whole sermon there, but when we talk about due process and those things, it can be very frustrating. There's not a lot you can do when the ALJs are in a way subsidized by the state. You're with another TennCare attorney. And so our mission is to plan as conservatively and safely as we can and get approval the first time. We really don't want to be at a fair hearing, which is hearing by telephone with an ALJ.
I had one that I won actually.
Yeah.
I didn't get represented just because there was a client that I was trying to get some.
And you just filed the appeal, and
yeah, I just filed it,
yep.
and I had this judge talking twice, and that 10-care attorney was so mad. I could just tell, like she's like, why am I here, and why am I here again, and why am I having to? And so, like, I said the same. I just kept saying the same things, and I was just like, look, he had eligibility. They didn't send him the paperwork. He lost eligibility, and then we figured it out, and he got it back. So we shouldn't have to miss on the gap,
There shouldn't be a gap there. It should be the continuity of pay.
Yeah, and I just kept saying the same thing, and she kept saying, what's the thing that you, objection? And then the judge kept overruling her. I think that's right. So, and she just kept getting more and more upset. And I was like, man. Anyway, the long and short of it is, if anybody is confused, that's the point. There's so many acronyms in healthcare that you have to advise with a professional if you want to be able to navigate the system. And there's like I said, it's an inevitability that you're going to need long-term care. And there's even more credence to the fact that most people just don't claim. And so if you're watching this episode and you're thinking, like, what do I need to do, or who do I need to call? Well, now they know. And the things that the things that I know, it's taken us decades to be able to figure it out. So it matters.
It is, and I mentioned, like, hey, how simple is it? And the reason why I say that for us, this is what I look at, these fact patterns and, and these strategies all day. And I still, we're always looking and learning from other mentors and continuing legal education. For those folks that are looking to get counsel, whether it's Beacon Legacy Group, we'd love to represent you, but you should be looking at, is this attorney certified? How many applications does their firm process a year? How many asset protections? I mean, you can ask these things and they have to tell you that. And so we just want to make sure people are getting represented competently.
It is expensive because, if you just do the math, you're having to pay somebody to be a caregiver probably $20 an hour if you want them to stay consistent, and be experienced, and not steal your stuff.
True,
so,
right?
Right. So if you're paying somebody $20 an hour, so they don't go work somewhere else, that's, let's just say, for example, 4 hours a day, that's, enough for maybe meal prep and a little bit of personal care assistance, maybe some homemaker services. So that's $80 a day. And let's say it's 5 days a week. So that's 80 times 5, which is $400. $400 a week times 4 weeks? It's about $2,000. So you got to ask yourself, if you're watching this, you got to ask yourself, like, do you have $2,000 set aside every month to pay for care?
For 4, 5, 6, but also like 3, 4 plus years, right? I mean, however long this person wants to, hopefully can age in place.
I mean, $2,000 times 12 months is 24,000. That's, 68,000 over the course of 3 years. And that's 4 hours. So that means that you are actively managing your chronic illnesses. You don't have any progression in your disabilities. You don't need more care. If you don't have like a dementia or a dementia diagnosis that is progressing into something more significant, it's kosher. So obviously it's unrealistic, but we've already, I think, beat in the message that preparation is key. So I don't think I need to continue to paint the bleakest picture possible. So step 2 is what we specialize in. We do step 1 as well, but primarily we work with step 2, which is essentially a residential model for people to live in the community on a fixed income, which is their Social Security, and not have to be in a facility.
Yeah.
So it's a hybrid model between living in your own home and being in a facility where you can provide 24-hour care. So now your condition, your disability has progressed to the point to where you need some type of 24-hour oversight, supervision.
We're no longer, quote unquote, really managing the chronic illness. We don't need 4 hours. We need 12 to 24 hours.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. And so, but at that point, what ends up happening is we work on a group home model. So we have 3 individuals that live in the same home, and we have 1 staff member that provides 24-hour care, and that's a 3-to-1 care ratio. But the problem that we face is we also don't have access to routine medical care. So we have to rely on the community resources, whether it's the emergency room, EMS, home health, like a medicine, which is a very popular quality. All those agencies. And so they have to bridge the medical gap. So we can do the non-medical side. They may be bedbound, needing Hoyer lift transfers, all that stuff. Then you go to step 3.
Yeah.
And step 3 is a facility that allows for access to routine medical care. They have nurses and doctors, LPNs. That's the model. And that's kind of the last step in the care process. And so when you go through all of those, when you get to step 3, you're pretty sick.
Yeah, you're very sick, most expensive.
Yeah.
I would like, so, you're you think, which is, a skill set that 95% of the population really doesn't do. I mean, really try to innovate.
Yeah.
What are your ideas? I mean, if anything, we first of all, like, the government's not bad. It's not evil. Like, listen here, this is like basic math. Like, it's true that, like, we've got Medicare, Medicaid, CMS, right? That is not the most solvent bucket of money. Social Security is under a lot of strain because of these demographic pressures that are barreling ahead in our society.
That's a good point.
America has always been able to innovate and figure this out, and we have to believe that we can. What are your thinking? Like, based on, your podcast that you have, or you're interviewing experts, like, what are some of the models that can fix the economic crisis, but also, like, just maybe provide better care?
Sure. So this is a unique issue, probably more unique than really anything that any other industry faces, because like I was saying earlier, it's healthcare, which means that you're taking care of people as your primary product. And I don't mean for that to sound crass. It's just, it's a good way of explaining it for people that are watching this episode and trying to get a general understanding of what we're talking about. So the applications require you to solve the problem, it's going to require you to increase the supply of caregivers. Either increase the supply of caregivers or change the way that we provide care. And everybody that advocates for change, unfortunately, they're kind of hamstrung, whether you're an advocate, whether you're somebody in government, whether you're somebody that's receiving care. They're all going to advocate for, pay me more money, or pay the provider more money, or give the system more money, because money is what's going to solve all of this. Well, I think you and I have established that that's not in anybody's wheelhouse. We're already funding these programs to insolvency.
Overly strained.
Correct. They're not going to continue to put more money into it to essentially bankrupt. Again,
put a lot of strain though on our public system. Yes, I mean, it's one of the largest line items on our congressional budget.
It's the top 3.
Okay.
Yeah, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid are the top 3.
Yeah.
So
if we put that off the table, like, what are our other?
So if you can't solve it by adding more money, then you have to get creative, and I think that there's a couple of things. So what we're doing is we're installing sensors all across the home. That we look at like a dashboard, and for about 6 to 12 hours in the evening time, we take the staff out and we just monitor the home and respond. They have buttons and life alerts.
Okay. Which is what that person was being paid to do, was monitor. And now we're decreasing payroll from 8 to 12 hours. And of course, someone's there when we notice there's an issue. But that's okay.
But they're able to, instead of it being 1 to 3, they're able to monitor 12 to 16 people.
Yes.
And respond in kind with some backup plans. And so what it does is it's kind of like this. Like, imagine if ADT, covered, 10 houses as opposed to 100,000 houses. So this is like ADT for elderly people. So if you just have one caregiver that's being paid to care for one person, or one caregiver that's being paid to care for 3 people, that's a lot of money. And what we're doing is we're trying to find a way to diversify the cost of that caregiver or that staff member, so that we can drive the cost down, and we can then allow people in the middle class, as you put it, to be able to access this market without it bankrupting them. Yeah.
You know, and it sounds so simple, but like if that could be done at scale across society, if like all, local, small and mid-range long-term care companies could incorporate that, I mean, that's a big step. And especially if they could have an open and honest, frank discussion that regardless of the larger macro issues around immigration, sure, we've got people here.
Yeah.
If this is going to help our whole society, like, can we not make common sense decisions there? I mean, I think both of those things are actually really good ideas,
When we get like 10 or 15 years down the road and AI is a little bit more advanced and more accepted, a lot of this monitoring is going to be done with AI. And I'm just I'm gonna plug this, and people are going to think like he's lost his mind. But just to draw a parallel, China has a surveillance state.
Yeah.
And so they have cameras everywhere. They have AI that's literally watching every movement. They identify every person. They know exactly what's happening. They
across their entire country, by the way.
Across their entire country, right? Yeah. So this is what I'm not saying, we're going to surveil people and put these and turn long-term care into a surveillance state.
You don't want to go into long-term care now, baby. You're going to be
right?
Surveilled until you die. Yeah.
But so if that software is already out there, then we just need to make it more humane and more in line with our democratic values.
Yep.
And you can have somebody that's monitoring passively to alert a loved one so that they don't have to worry what's going on with, their mom or their dad or grandma or spouse or even child, with disabilities.
I don't think it's wild to say that because, I think with the rapid advancement of artificial intelligence, and I try to be a positive person. Yes, there's lots of bad press, but already, what are we doing in our industry? We use ChatGPT 4.0 every single day. Oh, yeah. Everybody here, if our employees don't want to use it, they will not be employed here. Right. I mean, we've got to get on the wave here and watch it benefit. It can be a deflationary impact on a lot of industries, but also if you look at it in a positive, hopeful way, it also can radically expand our companies. But most importantly is fix these massive financial issues facing an industry like this.
Yes.
I mean, this could solve our Medicaid issues. We'll just see. I mean, right, in 2 decades.
Just got to have buy-in.
Just got to have buy-in, though. That's the thing. Yeah. Well, Kosta, this is leadership across the table. So I kind of want to end on a segment of discussing how there's a lot of challenges, obviously, in how you have had to run your company in this environment. How do you lead in general, from the caregiver to your management team? What are the things that set your company apart? What have you done as a leader to really make an impact on your people?
Well, there was and it's been a challenging year. There was a strategy that I had prior to COVID, and then somewhere along the lines I missed a memo, and so I've had to change how I manage individuals post COVID.
Okay,
and I think a lot of businesses are confronting this. Money still plays a role, but work-life balance is a very important piece. So you're gonna think that I've gone off the reservation, but I have to be a lot more diligent about making sure that I employ the right people that share my vision of how work works. Mm-hmm. And find technological applications or third-party vendors to handle all the stuff that I can't find people to do. Yeah. And I don't stand in their way. I don't check in. I don't necessarily ask questions unless there's some cause for concern. And they get the job done. They know exactly what's expected of them. And I try not to get too much on the weeds on, if they're working 40 hours. If they can get their job done in 20 hours, fantastic.
Get the mission done. Get this goal done.
Exactly. Yeah. And that has seemed to work pretty well. Anytime that you have a blind spot in your organization, you just have to think of creative ways to fill it. So like we had a issue with quality of care outcomes in 2022 and 2023. And so, we had to make some changes in our organization, but we also had to incorporate a compliance department to bridge some of the gaps that we had, kind of be an eye in the sky for people in the field. And it complements what we're trying to do with incorporating technology.
And it worked.
So we're in the process of building it out now, and but it's looking like it's all coming together nicely. We won't know if it works until probably the end of next year. But that's the beauty of running a business, is you never know if it's going to work. You just got to try it.
You got to try it, and you got to fail forward. You can't be scared to fail. You're never going to grow. I've learned that.
Yes. You have to expect that everything's going to come crashing down. Yeah. The best plan, what's that thing that Mike Tyson said about planning? Everyone has a great plan until they get punched in the face.
Oh, so true.
Like that is business. That's business. And that might even very well be life. You know, you can plan and it's great, but when you actually get down to hitting play, you know, or start driving the car that you built, you know, you could have the tire falling off and a mirror and the rear view fell down. You just got to keep going.
I love that. And what separates great leaders and great businesses from those that are not are people that are able to do that and suffer for a long. Okay, the CEO of NVIDIA is getting all this press, rightfully so, right now, and he's just put out a big thing that they're no longer hiring from a lot of like Ivy League schools and different things, largely because what they found is expectations and the inability to suffer has been zapped out of this whole population group for over a decade, and now there's no going back, in his opinion. And because of that, he has a massive organization, so it's not just him. He can't just have that value. He's got to have the ability to experiment, to fail, to get punched in the face and move. Yeah. And they can't find that talent. So that's a really, I think that's a really deep thing that you just put your finger on there. You know, I think the last thing that I just want to touch on, just for you personally, everyone's different with how they use their free time. Lots of people in Cook will see you running crazy all over the place, marathons, triathlons. How do you get it all done?
Running for me, so I run 5 to 6 miles a day, and I do 100 to 120 push-ups on the sidewalk in between each.
Keep it simple. Yeah, you know, exactly. This is it every day.
Exactly right. And what it is it's a reset. So just think about it like this: like, so you eat all this food. You walk into all these different places of business. You're in the elements all the time, and your body is just taking all this stuff in. Like it's just, you know, it's soaked in the world, right? And you go to bed, and you wake up, and you're rested somewhat. Drink a cup of coffee, and you just got to get all of it out to soak it all in again. And that's high level for anybody that's like, you know, a holistic medicine person. That's the best way for me to explain it. But during that time that I'm running, aside from obviously sweating profusely and burning, you know, 800 to 1,000 calories, I get a chance to think, and I usually think about things that frustrate me. And I mean, like rarely do I ever say hi to anybody. I'm always like, I have headphones in and I'm just like either looking at the sidewalk or looking up or screaming, you know, just trying to get that stress, that buildup of inertia from the day prior out of my body so I can do it again. It makes me, it feels great. At the end of it, I feel fresh. I feel clean. And I feel like I could confront really anything, because right now my schedule is, and I mean, this even applies to prior to this year, which wasn't as busy, but my schedule is, you know, I wake up, I exercise, I have an 8-hour day of meetings, and then I have an 8-hour day of doing my other job, you know, which is back end, you know, office stuff, CFO, stuff like that.
Yeah.
And
every day.
And to have the energy to be able to do that, you have to have stamina. And stamina is built through exercise.
People think that it's going to take away. I struggle with that. You know, I'm getting back into running and fitness too, but that's the biggest lie. Oh no, I'll take 5 to 7 a.m. and get on my laptop and answer emails or work on a project or journal or whatever it is. Like, no, you're just going to keep going down. Your battery is going to get depleted.
Right. I've tried it. I've tried doing the early morning email thing. And while there is some some benefits to it.
Yeah.
You're just going to have to learn how to multitask better
during your day.
That's
what I found too.
So like if you go to the bathroom, you need to be checking emails then. If you're in the middle of walking out of one meeting into another, you need to take 10 minutes. You need to check your emails and flag the ones you need to answer, and get to answer them in the evening time, as opposed to throughout the day. Obviously, some things just have to be answered, takes precedent. But the long and short, I think we're both kind of saying the same thing, is everybody needs a piece of you. For you to be successful, you have to give them a piece. And you have to manage that with, I've got 4 children, you've got two children, I'm sure you'll have more.
Yeah.
And you have to manage your life in a way that allows you to be effective for all of it.
Yeah.
For your family, for your work. If you've got to work till midnight or 2 a.m., then you work till 2 a.m. and then you get 4 hours of sleep. You wake up, you go run again, reset, and do it again and do it again, and hope that you get that one day off. Because here's the thing that a lot of people don't understand. Okay, so, and I know we're probably over time.
You're good. We're good.
Okay.
Yeah. I was just curious what it was.
What is the time?
10:37.
Okay,
we'll wrap up after this.
We got plenty of time. What people don't understand, or they don't want to believe, is that our lives are actually very comfortable and very easy. Okay, and I'm gonna end it the way I started it. When you turn the faucet on, water comes out. Okay, 24 hours a day. When you go to the grocery store, you can buy any kind of food you want, whether it's in season or not. If you are not able to pay your bills, you have food pantries, you have electrical assistance, you have rental assistance, like an entire infrastructure that's there to support you. Okay, so our life in America is so great. Literally, it's like there should be no reason for anybody to complain. So whenever I am sitting in the office and it's 1 o'clock in the morning and I know that I'm not done yet, but I'm going to have to get 4 hours of sleep, wake up, reset, do it again, and spend another, day in the office until 1 a.m. I just think to myself, like, well, let's see. I'm not in a world war. If I was in Russia, I would be fighting, brothers across the border. If I was in Ukraine, then I would be protecting our homeland. If I was in Israel, then I'd either be enlisted or I'd have the potential of being bombed at any point by one of
Lebanon or any of the other various
Iran,
factions.
Yeah. And so, like, we have such a great life in the United States. We shouldn't shy away from the fact that we have to work really, really hard and provide what Aristotle would consider to be the good life for our family. I mean, so I just don't take an excuse that my life is difficult. It's just I have to work a little bit harder this year than I have other years. That's all.
Yeah, and it's going to be okay.
It's going to be okay.
Well, Kosta, that wraps up our Leadership Across the Table series this week. That was an excellent episode. I really do encourage viewers to watch the entire thing. I appreciate you coming over, man.
Absolutely.
Yep.
This is my pleasure.
As always.